The wind screamed across the Wyoming plain like something alive and angry. Hank Lowell pulled his collar tight, breath freezing before it left his mouth. 10 below, maybe worse. His horse snorted steam, hooves crunching through snowdrifts on the mail route east of Copper Bend. Then he saw it, 50 yards off trail. Overturned mail crate, splintered wood, letters spinning in the wind like trapped birds. He dismounted slow, knees stiff with age and cold. Leather reins felt like iron in his hands. The lantern swung as he approached, throwing shadows across the snow. Inside the crate, a pair of blue eyes stared up at him. A woman, young, half-frozen, thin Chicago coat, no gloves, her lips were cracked and bleeding. In her rigid fingers, a red-stamped envelope. She tried to speak. Her voice came out a rasp. "Please, don't send me back." Hoofbeats, multiple riders coming fast from town. Hank didn't think. He lifted her. Lord, she weighed nothing, and draped her across his saddle. The envelope fell into the snow. He scooped it up, shoved it inside his coat. The riders were close now, voices carrying on the wind. He mounted behind her, kicked the horse hard. They cut through sagebrush, away from the trail toward his cabin 3 miles north. The woman's head lolled against his chest. Her breathing came shallow and fast. By the time he reached the cabin, his arms were numb. He shouldered the door open, carried her inside. The potbelly stove had gone cold. He laid her on his bunk, struck a match with shaking hands, got kindling burning. The stove began to tick and crackle as heat spread. He stripped off her wet coat, soaked through, useless. Her dress underneath was damp with sweat and snow. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, rough wool that smelled of horses and old smoke. Then he filled the coffee pot, set it on the stove. Her whole body convulsed, teeth chattering so hard he thought they'd crack. "Easy now," he said. "You're safe." She didn't respond. Her eyes rolled back. He forced hot coffee between her lips, a few drops at a time. She coughed, sputtered, but swallowed. Color began creeping back into her cheeks. Her breathing slowed. An hour passed. The wind howled outside. Hank sat in his chair, watching her. The envelope lay on the table between them, red stamp facing up. He hadn't opened it yet. Finally, her eyes fluttered open. She looked around, confused, terrified. Then she saw him. "Where?" "My cabin," Hank said. 12 miles outside Copper Bend. You're safe." She tried to sit up. He raised a hand. "Don't. You nearly froze to death out there." She sank back, trembling. Her gaze went to the envelope. "You read it?" "No, ma'am." "Good." Her voice was hoarse. "Don't." He poured another cup of coffee, handed it to her. Her fingers were too stiff to hold it. He steadied the cup while she drank. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lydia. Lydia May Sinclair." "Hank Lowell. I ride mail for the Territorial Post." She closed her eyes. "Then you know what I am." "I know you were dying in a snowbank. That's all I need to know right now." A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away fast, like she was ashamed. "He paid $2,000 for me." Hank's chest went tight. "Who?" "Clayton Durfee, rancher. You know him?" Everyone knew Durfee. Richest man in 3 counties, ran cattle, owned half the town council, had the territorial governor's ear, a man you didn't cross. "I know him. My uncle owed money in Chicago, gambling debts. A broker came, said he could fix it. All I had to do was marry a respectable man out west. Fresh start." Her laugh was bitter. "I didn't know until I got on the train. There was a contract. I couldn't read all the words, legal script, fancy writing, but I saw the number, $2,000. My uncle sold me." Hank's jaw tightened. He'd seen a lot in 67 years. War, death, cruelty that made no sense. But this turned his stomach. "There's a law," Lydia said quietly. "Territorial statute. If a mail-order bride doesn't arrive within 7 days, she's considered abandoned cargo. The dowry gets forfeited. And the woman—" She looked at him. "The woman reverts to the shipper, like a piece of furniture. That can't be legal." "It is. The broker showed me the paperwork." Hank stood, paced to the window. Snow was piling against the glass. The storm wasn't letting up. "How long you been traveling?" 10 days. The train was late. Then the mail convoy got stuck in the pass. I was supposed to arrive last Tuesday." Her voice cracked. "I'm 3 days overdue." Hank turned. "So by that law, I'm cargo now. Abandoned property. He can claim me, or the broker can sell me again." She pulled the blanket tighter. "That's why I ran. When the crate tipped, I thought maybe God was giving me a chance. But if you send me back, I'm not sending you anywhere. She stared at him. You don't understand. Durfee has power. He'll come for me. And when he does, the sound of hoofbeats cut her off. Hank moved to the window, pulled the curtain back an inch. 3 riders coming up the trail, torches in the snow. He recognized the lead horse, Sheriff Cobb. Lydia's face went white. They found me. Hank's hand went to the rifle above the door. Then he stopped. Thought. Stay quiet, he said. Don't say a word. 3 hard knocks rattled the door. Hank opened the door halfway. Cold air rushed in. Sheriff Cobb stood on the step, 2 deputies behind him. Their breath hung in the lantern light. Evening, Hank. Sheriff. Cobb looked past him into the cabin. Mind if we come in? I do, actually. It's late. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. We're looking for a woman, mail-order bride, gone missing from the convoy. You seen anyone on your route? Just mail and snow. That so? Cobb tilted his head. Because Durfee's men found an overturned crate about 3 miles south of here. Fresh tracks leading north. Hank kept his face blank. Storm probably scattered it. I'll check the route in the morning. One of the deputies shifted his weight. We got a federal warrant, Hank. Girls considered abandoned cargo under territorial law. Mr. Durfee has a legal claim. Cargo? Hank said slowly. You mean a person? I mean the law. Cobb's tone hardened. Now step aside. Hank didn't move. You got a warrant to search my property? Don't need one. This is a federal matter. Then come back with a federal marshal. The 2 men stared at each other. Wind howled through the pines. Finally, Cobb stepped back. Suit yourself, but I'll be watching this place. And if I find out you're harboring her... Good night, Sheriff. Hank closed the door, slid the bolt, listened to the hoofbeats fade. When he turned, Lydia was standing by the stove, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Her face was pale. He'll come back. I reckon he will. You should have turned me in. You'll lose everything. Hank walked to the table, sat down heavy. His daughter's face flashed in his mind. Mary, 23 years old, dying in a bed soaked with blood because the doctor came too late. He'd stood there helpless, watching her slip away. He wasn't going to stand helpless again. Some things a man can't compromise on, he said. By morning, the whole town knew. Hank heard it the moment he walked into the general store, voices dropping to whispers, eyes tracking him across the room. Mrs. Talbot, the postmistress, gave him a small nod from behind the counter. Doc Henley touched his hat brim, but the others, ranchers, shopkeepers, Durfee's men, they watched him like he'd grown a second head. At the back table, 2 women whispered. One of them was the preacher's wife. Christian mercy, I say. Mercy or foolishness? Man his age, keeping a young woman, it ain't natural. Hank bought flour and salt, paid in silence, and left. That afternoon, the church bell rang. Not for service. For an emergency town meeting. Hank didn't want to go, but staying away would only make things worse. He walked the mile into town, boots crunching on frozen mud. The courthouse was packed, 50, maybe 60 people, more standing outside. Clayton Durfee sat at the front table, flanked by his foreman and a man in a suit, lawyer, probably. Durfee was 55, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven. He dressed like a gentleman, pressed vest, gold watch chain, but his eyes were cold. Sheriff Cobb stood by the door. Judge's proxy, a weasel-faced clerk named Simmons, sat at the bench with a stack of papers. Hank took a seat and back. Every head turned. Simmons banged a gavel. Order. This hearing concerns the matter of one Lydia May Sinclair, mail-order bride, contracted to Mr. Clayton Durfee under Territorial Statute 48-12. Mr. Durfee, you have the floor. Durfee stood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Gentlemen, ladies, I'm a simple rancher. I work hard, pay my taxes, support this community. Last November, I contracted through a reputable Chicago broker for a bride. Legal transaction, $2,000 paid in full. He held up a document. Here's the contract. Signed, notarized, filed with the Territorial Registry. Murmurs rippled through the room. Miss Sinclair was due to arrive 10 days ago. She did not. Under Statute 48-12, any bride who fails to arrive within 7 days is considered abandoned cargo, subject to reclamation or forfeiture. Durfee's gaze swept the room. I have a legal right to retrieve my property. Someone in the crowd muttered agreement. Hank's hands clenched. Now, Durfee continued, I'm a reasonable man. I don't want trouble, but it's come to my attention that Miss Sinclair is being harbored, unlawfully, by Mr. Hank Lowell. All eyes turned to Hank. Simmons leaned forward. Mr. Lowell, do you have Miss Sinclair in your custody? Hank stood. His legs felt stiff. The room went quiet. I do. Gasps. Whispers. Durfee's lawyer smiled. Then you're in violation of— Can't be, Hank said. His voice cut through the noise. She's my wife. The room exploded. Durfee shot to his feet. That's a damn lie. Simmons banged the gavel. Order! Order! Hank kept his eyes on Durfee. Married her 2 nights ago, in my cabin, witnessed by God and conscience. No, you got papers? Durfee's face was red now. Don't need papers for a frontier marriage. Common law. That's not— Durfee turned to his lawyer. The man whispered something. Durfee's jaw tightened. Fine. Then prove it. Produce a marriage certificate. Or a witness. Hank said nothing. Because he didn't have either. Simmons cleared his throat. Mr. Lowell, without documentation, your claim holds no legal weight. Circuit Judge Pritchard arrives in 4 weeks. You'll present proof then, or face charges of perjury and harboring stolen property. Stolen property, like she was a horse. Hank's voice came out low and hard. She's not property. The law says otherwise. Durfee leaned on the table. 4 weeks, Lowell. And if you can't prove she's yours? He smiled. She's mine. The gavel came down. The room emptied slowly. Hank walked out into the cold, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He'd bought Lydia time, but at what cost? Hank walked the back trail to avoid eyes. Snow crunched under his boots. The sun was setting, painting the plains red and gold. His breath came short, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he'd done. He'd lied under oath, in front of the whole town, for a woman he'd known 2 days. When he reached the cabin, Lydia was standing at the window. She turned when he entered, her face tight with worry. What happened? He told her. All of it. The meeting, Durfee's contract, the 4-week deadline. When he finished, she sank into the chair by the stove. You shouldn't have done that. Too late now. They'll charge you with perjury. You'll lose your postal contract. Maybe worse. Her hands twisted in her lap. I'm not worth this. Hank crossed to the stove, poured coffee. The tin pot clanked against the cup. He handed it to her. My daughter's name was Mary, he said quietly. She died 12 years ago, childbirth. I rode 6 hours to fetch the doctor, but by the time we got back— He stopped, swallowed. I've spent 12 years wondering if I could have ridden faster, done something different. Lydia's eyes filled. I can't bring her back, Hank said, but I can do this, so don't tell me you're not worth it. She looked down at the coffee. Steam rose between them. 4 weeks, she whispered. What do we do? Find proof you never signed that contract willingly, or prove Durfee's lying. He sat across from her. Tell me everything, from the beginning. The next morning, Hank rode into town before dawn. He hitched his horse outside the post office, a narrow building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. Inside, Mrs. Talbot was sorting mail by lamplight. She looked up when the bell jingled. Hank? She glanced past him, toward the street. You alone? Yes, ma'am. She set down the letters, wiped her hands on her apron. Mrs. Talbot was 60, maybe older, widow. Her husband had run the post office before he died. She'd kept it going ever since, quiet, efficient, unbothered by gossip. I heard about the meeting, she said. I figured. She studied him for a long moment. Then she walked to the back room. When she returned, she carried a large, leather-bound book, the postal registry. She set it on the counter between them. This book records every piece of official mail filed through this office, she said. Contracts, deeds, federal documents. Each entry gets logged, dated, sealed with wax. She tapped the cover. I've been postmistress here 9 years. I keep this book locked. Always. Hank leaned closer. What are you saying? Mrs. Talbot opened the book. Her finger ran down the entries, names, dates, postage amounts. She stopped at November. Clayton Durfee filed a land deed in November, filed a cattle invoice in October. But look here, she pointed. No marriage contract, no papers for a Miss Lydia May Sinclair, nothing. Hank's pulse quickened. You're saying— I'm saying those papers were never officially mailed through federal registry. If they weren't mailed, they weren't filed. And if they weren't filed— She met his eyes. They're not legal. Why didn't you say something at the meeting? Because Simmons is Durfee's man. He would have dismissed it. Or worse, claimed I lost the record. She closed the book. But Circuit Judge Pritchard is different. He's old cavalry, fought at Little Bighorn. He doesn't take kindly to men who buy and sell women like cattle. Hope flared in Hank's chest. So when he gets here, you bring this book to court, under federal seal. Let the judge see for himself. Hank exhaled. Thank you. Mrs. Talbot's expression softened. That girl, she's safe with you? She is. Good. She picked up the registry, carried it back to the lockbox. There's been rumors about that Chicago broker for 2 years now. Girls going missing, families asking questions. If this case cracks it open... She locked the box. Well, sometimes one witness is all it takes. Hank tipped his hat and left. That afternoon, Doc Henley rode out to the cabin. He was 70, white-haired, with hands that shook but still knew their work. He carried a leather medical bag that smelled of carbolic acid and old leather. Lydia was nervous when he arrived. Hank introduced them at the door. Doc's all right, Hank said. He's here to help. Doc set his bag on the table, pulled out a stethoscope. I'll need to examine you, miss. Check for frostbite, malnutrition, anything that might support your case. Lydia hesitated, then nodded. Doc was thorough. He checked her fingers, toes, listened to her lungs, wrote notes in a small pad. When he finished, he sat back. Severe hypothermia. Frostbite on 3 fingers. Should heal, but it was close. Malnutrition. Bruising on your wrists, consistent with restraint. He looked at her. How long were you kept in that crate? 2 days. They said the convoy was delayed. Kept me locked inside so I wouldn't run. Doc's jaw tightened. He wrote faster. When he finished, he tore the page out, folded it, handed it to Hank. Medical affidavit, signed and dated. It proves she was fleeing harm, not abandoning a contract. He stood. I'll testify when the judge arrives. If Durfee wants a fight, he'll get one. Hank shook his hand. I'm in your debt. No debt. Doc picked up his bag. Just doing what's right. After he left, Hank unfolded the affidavit, read it twice. Then he tucked it inside his coat next to the red-stamped envelope. Lydia watched him from the stove. Do you really think this will work? Hank looked at her, this woman he barely knew, who'd stumbled into his life like a storm. I think the truth's got weight, he said. We just need folks willing to hold it. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. 4 weeks until the judge arrived. 4 weeks to build a case against the most powerful man in 3 counties. Clayton Durfee sat in his study, whiskey glass in hand, staring at the fire. His foreman, a slab of a man named Kern, stood by the door. Well, Durfee said. Lowell's got Doc Henley and the postmistress on his side. Town's split. Half think he's noble. Other half think he's a fool. Durfee swirled his whiskey. The amber liquid caught the firelight. I don't care what they think. I care what they'll testify to in 4 weeks. Judge Pritchard's no pushover. I know. Durfee set the glass down. So we changed the fight. Kern frowned. How? We don't argue law, we argue character. Durfee stood, paced to the window. Snow stretched for miles, white and clean. Lowell's 67 years old, keeping a girl young enough to be his granddaughter. Alone, in that cabin, no chaperone, no witnesses. He turned. What does that look like to decent folk? Kern's eyes narrowed. You want to ruin him? I want to win. Durfee pulled on his coat. Spread the word. Lowell's not a hero. He's an old man who's lost his mind. Unfit to hold a postal contract. Unfit to be trusted. He buttoned the coat. And if the judge still rules against me? His voice dropped. Burn the cabin. Make it look like an accident. Winter's dangerous. Stoves malfunction. Kern nodded slowly. And the girl? Durfee picked up his hat. Dead women don't testify. Sunday morning. The church bell rang clear and cold across Copper Bend. Hank hadn't been to service in years, not since Mary died. But Lydia asked to go, said she needed to pray, needed to be seen as more than a rumor. So he hitched the wagon, helped her up, and drove the 2 miles into town. The church was a simple whitewashed building with a steeple that leaned slightly west. Inside, pews creaked under the weight of 50 souls. Hank and Lydia sat in the back. Eyes tracked them. Whispers hissed like snakes. The preacher, Reverend Mills, a thin man with kind eyes, began his sermon. Something about mercy and judgment. Hank barely heard it. His attention was on the rows ahead. Durfee sat up front, dressed in a fine black suit, beside him his lawyer, behind them a cluster of ranchers and their wives. Halfway through the sermon, Durfee stood. Reverend Mills stopped mid-sentence. Mr. Durfee? Forgive the interruption, Reverend. Durfee's voice was loud enough to fill the room. But I have a matter of conscience that can't wait. The room went silent. Durfee turned to face the congregation. His gaze swept over Hank and Lydia. We're a community built on law and decency. We trust each other. We look after our own. He reached inside his coat, pulled out a folded document. Which is why it pains me to bring this before you. He unfolded it. The paper crinkled in the silence. This is a corrected marriage certificate, filed last week with the territorial office in Cheyenne. It shows that Miss Lydia May Sinclair signed a binding contract with me, witnessed, notarized, dated November 14th of last year. Gasps rippled through the pews. Now, Durfee continued, Mr. Lowell claims he married her, but I have this. He held the certificate high. Proof that she was already legally bound to me before she ever set foot in his cabin. Lydia's hand gripped Hank's arm. Her face had gone pale. Durfee walked down the aisle, slow and deliberate. He stopped beside their pew. Miss Sinclair. His voice was softer now, almost gentle. Did you sign this contract in Chicago? Lydia's breath came shallow. She stared at the paper, the letters cursive, legal script, words she couldn't fully read. Her voice cracked. I can't remember. Durfee's expression was almost pitying. You can't remember signing a marriage contract? I signed papers. My uncle, he said it was for passage west. I didn't. She looked at Hank, desperate. The writing was so small, I couldn't read all of it. So you're saying you might have signed it? I don't know. The congregation erupted. Voices overlapping, some in outrage, some in pity. Reverend Mills tried to restore order, but it was too late. Durfee turned to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not an unreasonable man, but Mr. Lowell has made a serious accusation. He claims Miss Sinclair is his wife. Yet here, he waved the certificate, is legal proof she was mine first. Sheriff Cobb stood from his pew. What are you asking for, Clayton? Justice? Durfee folded the paper. I'm asking that the court investigate Mr. Lowell for fraud, perjury, and unlawful harboring. And until the judge arrives, I'm asking that Miss Sinclair be placed in custody for her own protection. No, Lydia stood, trembling. I won't go with you. You don't have a choice. Durfee's mask slipped, just for a second. His eyes went cold. You're bound to me by law, and if this old fool thinks he can lie his way out of it... Hank rose. You produced that certificate awfully fast for something filed last week. Durfee's jaw tightened. It was delayed. Bureaucracy. Or forge. The word hung in the air like smoke. Durfee's lawyer stepped forward. That's slander, Mr. Lowell. You'll answer for it. I'll answer for a lot of things, Hank said, but not to you. Reverend Mills raised his hands. Gentlemen, please. This is the Lord's house. Then let the Lord bear witness. Hank turned to the congregation. This man paid $2,000 for a woman like she was livestock. Kept her locked in a crate for 2 days, left her to freeze in a snowbank when the convoy tipped, and now he waves a paper around and calls it justice. Murmurs spread, some nodded, others looked away. Durfee's face darkened. You've made your position clear, Lowell. So have I. He turned to Sheriff Cobb. I want a formal complaint filed. Fraud, perjury, and investigation into his postal contract. A man who lies in church can't be trusted with federal mail. Cobb hesitated, then nodded. I'll file it tomorrow. Durfee smiled. Good. He glanced at Lydia one last time. See you in 4 weeks, Miss Sinclair. Or should I say, Mrs. Durfee. He walked out. His men followed. The church emptied slowly. Hank and Lydia sat alone in the back pew. Her hands shook. Tears streaked her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I couldn't remember. I should have... It's all right. It's not. She looked at him. He's going to win, and you're going to lose everything. Hank stood, offered his hand. She took it. We're not done yet, he said. But as they walked out into the cold, he felt the weight of it. Durfee's power, the town's doubt, the ticking clock. 3 weeks until the judge arrived, and the trap was closing. That evening, Hank lit the lamp and set it on the table between them. Outside, the wind had died. The silence felt heavier than the storm. Lydia sat with her hands folded, staring at nothing. She hadn't spoken since they left the church. Hank pulled out a stack of papers, mail he'd sorted over the years, notices, contracts. He spread them on the table. Come here, he said. She didn't move. Lydia, come here. Slowly she stood, walked to the table. Her eyes were red from crying. Hank pointed to the top document. Read this. I can't. You can. Just slow. He traced his finger under the first line. What's this word? She leaned closer, squinted. Post? Postal. Good. Next one. Registry? Right. He moved to the next line. Keep going. For an hour they worked through the stack. Postal codes, legal terms, contract language. She stumbled often, had to sound out letters, but she kept trying. The smell of kerosene filled the cabin as the lamp burned low. Finally, Hank pulled out the red stamped envelope, the one she'd been clutching when he found her. He set it on the table. This is what you were holding in the crate. You ever open it? She shook her head. Let's see what's inside. He slit the seal with his pocket knife. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. He spread it flat. Lydia leaned over it. Her lips moved as she read, slow and halting. Property? Transfer? Agreement. Her finger traced the words. Witnessed by Chicago. Marriage. Broker. She stopped, looked up at Hank. It doesn't say marriage license? No, it doesn't. It says transfer. Her voice rose. Like furniture, like cattle. Hank nodded. That's the truth of it. She stared at the paper. Her hands started to shake. Then she laughed, bitter, broken. I thought I was going to be a wife. Build a home, have children. The laugh died. I was cargo. Hank let her sit with it, didn't rush her. After a while, she wiped her eyes. What do we do with this? We show it to the judge. Prove Durfee's contract isn't what he claims. He folded the paper carefully. But you need to be able to read it yourself. In front of the court. No hesitation. She nodded. Then teach me. 2 days later, Hank rode to the cemetery on the hill east of town. The ground was frozen hard, graves marked by simple wooden crosses. One stood slightly apart from the others. Mary Lowell, 1848 to 1871, beloved daughter. He knelt beside it, brushed snow from the marker. The wood was weathered now, letters fading. He should have replaced it years ago. Never found the will. Been a while, he said quietly. The wind stirred the pines. A raven called from somewhere distant. Got myself in a mess this time. He pulled off his hat, turned it in his hands. There's a girl, not much older than you were. She's in trouble, bad trouble. And he stopped, swallowed. I couldn't just ride past her, Mary. I couldn't. He thought of that night 12 years ago, the blood, the doctor arriving too late, her hand going cold in his. I was too slow then. I won't be too slow now. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a silver ring, simple band, no stone. Mary's wedding ring. He'd kept it all these years, couldn't bring himself to bury it with her. He turned it over in his palm. The metal caught the weak sunlight. I want to give this to Lydia, not as a claim, just as... He struggled for words. A promise. That she's got family, that someone's standing with her. The raven called again, closer now. Hank closed the box. If that's wrong, you let me know. He waited. The wind blew, the trees swayed, nothing else. He stood, put his hat back on. As he walked to his horse, he heard it, a crack like a gunshot. He spun, hand going to his belt. But it wasn't a gun, it was ice. Down the hill, the creek that had been frozen solid for 2 months was breaking up. Water running underneath, pressure building, ice splitting along the seams. Spring thaw, starting early this year. Hank stared at it for a long moment, then he mounted his horse and rode back toward the cabin. Behind him, the creek kept cracking, slow, inevitable. That night, Lydia practiced reading by lamplight. The certificate, the property transfer, every word, over and over, until she could recite them without stumbling. Hank sat across from her, watching, listening. When she finished, she set the papers down. I'm ready. You sure? No. She met his eyes. But I will be. He pulled the wooden box from his pocket, opened it. The ring gleamed inside. This was my daughter's, he said. I want you to have it. Lydia's breath caught. I can't. Not as a wife. As family. He held it out. You're not alone in this, you understand? Her eyes filled. She took the ring, turned it in her fingers. Then she slipped it onto her right hand. It fit perfectly. Thank you, she whispered. Outside, the creek ice cracked again, louder this time. 2 weeks until the judge arrived. Sheriff Cobb's office smelled of tobacco and old wood. Durfee sat across the desk, a leather pouch in his hand. He opened it, slid a folded document across. "What's this?" Bob asked. "Land deed, 20 acres adjoining your property. Good grazing land." Durfee leaned back. "Consider it a token of appreciation for your diligence in upholding the law." Cobb stared at the deed. His jaw worked. "You're bribing me. I'm compensating you for inconvenience." Durfee's tone was pleasant, reasonable. "You've been patient through this whole affair. I'm simply ensuring you're not forgotten." Cobb picked up the deed, studied it. 20 acres worth maybe $300. Not a fortune, but more than he'd see in a year of sheriffing. He set it down. "What do you want?" "Just make sure Lowell doesn't run before the trial. Keep an eye on that cabin if he tries to flee with the girl." Durfee spread his hands. "Well, that's evidence of guilt, isn't it?" Cobb nodded slowly, folded the deed, slipped it into his drawer. After Durfee left, Cobb sat alone in the dim office. He opened the drawer again, pulled out 2 documents, the land deed and the original federal warrant for Lydia's arrest. He laid them side by side. The warrant was dated November 20th. Official federal seal, signed by a territorial judge. Everything proper. But the marriage certificate Durfee had waved in church, that one bothered him. The ink had been too dark, too fresh, paper too crisp for something supposedly filed 4 months ago. Cobb pulled it from the evidence file, held it to the lamplight. The signature at the bottom read, "Lydia M. Sinclair." He opened his desk, found another document, Lydia's original travel papers from the mail convoy. Her signature there was shaky, uncertain, like someone who didn't write often. The signature on the marriage certificate was smooth, confident, practiced. They didn't match. Cobb sat back, rubbed his face. He'd been a lawman 23 years, seen his share of forgeries. This was one of them. He looked at the land deed again, then at the warrant. Finally, he locked both documents in his drawer and blew out the lamp. Judge Amos Pritchard rode into Copper Bend on a cold March morning. He was 71, white-haired, with a face like carved stone. He'd been circuit judge for 15 years. Before that, cavalry officer, 7th Cavalry, Little Bighorn. He'd seen the worst men could do to each other. He had no patience for liars. His clerk had sent word ahead. Court would convene the next morning. Every party was to bring evidence, witnesses, and testimony. No delays, no excuses. That evening, Hank stood on his porch, watching the sunset. The snow had mostly melted. Mud and grass showed through in patches. The creek ran loud and fast, swollen with runoff. Lydia came outside, wrapped in a shawl. She stood beside him. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow." What if it's not enough? The registry, the certificate, Doc's testimony? What if Durfee still wins? Hank didn't answer right away. A hawk circled overhead, wings catching the last light. "Then we did what we could," he said. "Sometimes that's all a man's got." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Why did you stop that day, when you found me?" He'd asked himself the same question 100 times. "I don't rightly know," he said. "Maybe I was tired of riding past things that needed fixing. Or maybe," he glanced at her, "maybe I just couldn't leave you there." She nodded, pulled the shawl tighter. "Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for giving me a chance. You gave yourself the chance. I just held the door open." They stood in silence as the sun dropped below the horizon. The sky turned from gold to purple to black. Stars began to emerge, cold and distant. Inside, the stove ticked as it cooled. Tomorrow the truth would have its day. Judge Pritchard sat in the room above the general store, reviewing case files by candlelight. Mrs. Talbot had brought him dinner, stew and bread. He ate without tasting it, his attention on the documents. Durfee's marriage contract, the federal warrant, Sheriff Cobb's report, Doc Henley's medical affidavit, and a note slipped under his door an hour ago, unsigned. It read, "Check the ink on Durfee's certificate, then check the postal registry. Someone's lying." Pritchard held the certificate to the candle flame. The ink gleamed, fresh. Too fresh for November. He set it down, steepled his fingers. He'd seen this before. Men with money buying their way around the law, forging documents, bribing clerks. During the war, officers had sold false discharges. After the war, land speculators forged deeds, always the same pattern, power without accountability. He'd fought at Little Bighorn, watched good men die because someone higher up made a bad call and refused to admit it. He'd sworn then, if he ever had authority, he'd use it for truth, not convenience. He stood, walked to the window. Below, the town was dark, except for a few lanterns. Somewhere out there, Hank Lowell was preparing for tomorrow. So was Clayton Durfee. Pritchard had already made up his mind about one thing. If someone had forged that certificate, they'd answer for it, rich or poor, powerful or not. The law was the law. But justice, that was something else. Something harder, something that required a man to look past the paper and see the human underneath. He returned to the desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, wrote a single order. Mrs. Talbot, postmistress, bring the Federal Postal Registry to court tomorrow. Under seal. No exceptions. He folded it, sealed it with wax, slid it under her door on his way back to his room. The moon rose over Copper Bend, cold and clear. Tomorrow, someone's lie would crack wide open. The cabin was dark except for a single candle on the table. Hank sat with his head in his hands. The registry book would prove the papers were never filed. Doc's affidavit would show Lydia fled harm. The property transfer document would expose Durfee's lie. But he'd still lied under oath, called Lydia his wife when she wasn't. Perjury. The judge could jail him for it, strip his postal contract, fine him everything he had. And for what? A woman he'd known a month? He thought of Mary again. Her last words, whispered through blood-soaked lips. Don't blame yourself, Pa. But he had, for 12 years. Lydia's footsteps creaked on the floorboards behind him. She sat down across the table, still wearing the shawl. You should sleep, she said. Can't. Because of tomorrow? Because I lied. He looked up at her. In front of God and the whole town. Called you my wife when you're not. And now we're going into that courtroom built on a lie. Lydia reached across the table, took his hand. You gave me time to find the truth, she said quietly. Without that lie, Durfee would have dragged me back the first night. I'd be locked in his house right now, or dead. Her grip tightened. So if that's a sin, Hank Lowell, then it's the most merciful sin I've ever seen. His throat tightened. The judge won't see it that way. Maybe not, but I do, and so does God. She released his hand. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll speak for myself, and if I fail... She stood. At least I'll fail standing. She walked to the small cot by the stove, her bed for the past month, lay down, pulled the blanket over her shoulders. Hank sat in the dark, listening to her breathing slow. After a while, he blew out the candle. Outside, the creek ran loud in the night. Pre-dawn. The courthouse was a squat wooden building with a tin roof and narrow windows. By the time the sun rose, 100 people had gathered outside. More than had come to the town meeting. Word had spread. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Inside, the room smelled of old smoke and damp wood. Benches filled quickly. Hank and Lydia sat at the front table on the left. Across the aisle, Durfee sat with his lawyer, a slick man from Cheyenne with oiled hair and a thin smile. Judge Pritchard entered through the side door. Everyone stood. He took his seat at the bench, a raised platform with a scarred oak desk. His gavel lay before him like a weapon. Be seated. The room obeyed. Pritchard's gaze swept the crowd, lingered on Durfee, then Hank, finally Lydia. This court convenes to resolve the matter of Miss Lydia May Sinclair's legal status. Mr. Durfee claims contractual marriage. Mr. Lowell claims common law marriage. Both cannot be true. He picked up a file. Up AU. We'll hear evidence, then I'll rule. No interruptions, no outbursts, speak when called. Understood? Murmurs of assent. Mr. Durfee, present your case. Durfee stood. His lawyer handed him the marriage certificate, the one from the church. Durfee walked it to the bench, set it before the judge. Your Honor, this is a corrected marriage certificate filed with the territorial office in Cheyenne. It shows Miss Sinclair signed a binding contract with me on November 14th. Witnessed, notarized, legal in every respect. Pritchard examined it, said nothing. Miss Sinclair was contracted through a reputable Chicago broker, Durfee continued. I paid $2,000 in good faith. She was to arrive by January 10th. She did not. Under territorial statute, she's considered abandoned property, subject to my claim. Property, Pritchard said flatly. Legal terminology, Your Honor. Pritchard set the certificate aside. Anything else? Just that. Lowell has no proof of his so-called marriage, no certificate, no witnesses, no legal standing whatsoever. Pritchard's eyes shifted to Hank. Mr. Lowell, your turn. Hank stood. His knees felt stiff. He walked to the bench carrying 3 documents, the property transfer paper, Doc's affidavit, and a note from Mrs. Talbot. Your Honor, first this. He laid down the property transfer. This is what Miss Sinclair actually signed in Chicago. It's not a marriage license, it's a transfer of property rights. She was sold, not married. Gasps rippled through the room. Durfee's face darkened. Pritchard read the document, his jaw tightened. Second, Hank continued, Doc Henley's medical report shows Miss Sinclair was fleeing harm when I found her. Hypothermia, restraint injuries, malnutrition. Pritchard read that too, nodded slowly. And third, Mrs. Talbot, the postmistress, has kept the Federal Postal Registry under lock since November. No marriage papers for Miss Sinclair were ever filed through official channels. Which means Hank met Durfee's eyes. That certificate he's waving is a forgery. The room exploded. Pritchard's gavel came down like thunder. Order! Silence fell, sharp and sudden. Pritchard looked at Durfee. Is that true? Absolutely not. The papers were delayed. Then you'll have the original filing receipt from Cheyenne. Durfee hesitated. It was misplaced. Convenient. Pritchard turned to the bailiff. Bring me the postal registry, now. Mrs. Talbot stood from the gallery. She'd been waiting. She carried a locked wooden box to the bench, set it down, pulled a key from her apron, opened it. Inside was the leather-bound registry book. The federal seal on the cover was intact. Pritchard lifted it carefully. The wax seal cracked as he opened the book, a sound like a bone snapping. He ran his finger down the entries. November, December, January. He looked up. No record of marriage papers for Lydia May Sinclair. No postage paid, no federal filing. Durfee shot to his feet. That's impossible. Sit down. Pritchard's voice was iron. Durfee sat. The judge turned to Lydia. Miss Sinclair, stand please. She rose. Her legs trembled, but she stood straight. Can you read? Yes, sir, some. Read this. He turned the property transfer document toward her. Aloud. Lydia stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but grew stronger with each word. Property transfer agreement. Witnessed by Chicago Marriage Broker, Incorporated. Transferee, Clayton Durfee. Sum $2,000, rights conveyed, full custody and... Her voice cracked. And ownership. The room was silent. Pritchard leaned back. Ownership. Yes, sir. He closed the registry, folded his hands. Mr. Durfee, you forged a federal document, you bribed officials, and you attempted to buy a human being. His eyes were cold. This court finds your claim void. Miss Sinclair is a free woman. Lydia's knees buckled. Hank caught her. Pritchard wasn't finished. Furthermore, you're fined $5,000 for forgery and fraud. You'll surrender your postal privileges, and you'll answer to the territorial marshal for trafficking. He banged the gavel. This case is closed. Durfee lunged forward, toward Lydia, hand reaching. Sheriff Cobb tackled him, slammed him against the table. Iron snapped around his wrists. Get him out of here, Pritchard said. They dragged Durfee toward the door. He twisted, shouting, You can't do this. I have friends. I'll appeal. The door slammed. His voice cut off. The room erupted in noise, voices overlapping, some cheering, some shocked. Pritchard stood. Miss Sinclair. Lydia looked up. You're free. Go live your life. She nodded, tears streaming. The judge's gaze shifted to Hank. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Pritchard gave the smallest nod and walked out. The courthouse steps were crowded. People pressed close. Some to congratulate, others just to stare. Hank guided Lydia through the crush, one hand on her shoulder. She was shaking, not from fear this time, from relief so vast it had nowhere to go. Mrs. Talbot met them at the bottom of the steps. She pulled Lydia into a brief, firm embrace. You did well, child. I couldn't have. Without the registry. Hush. It's over now. Mrs. Talbot stepped back. You've got a home here long as you need it. Don't forget that. Doc Henley approached next, tipped his hat. Takes courage to stand in front of a room like that. You've got plenty. Lydia managed a smile. Thank you. For everything. He nodded to Hank. You too, you stubborn old fool. Hank almost laughed. Reckon I earned that. The crowd began to disperse. Some lingered, ranchers who'd sided with Durfee, now looking uncertain. The preacher's wife dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Even a few of Durfee's hired men nodded as they passed, respect grudging, but present. Sheriff Cobb stood by the hitching post, watching. When Hank caught his eye, Cobb walked over. Lowell. Sheriff. Cobb pulled something from his coat, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Hank. Land deed. Durfee tried to bribe me with it yesterday. Figured you should know. Hank unfolded it. 20 acres. Good land. You didn't take it. No. Cobb looked toward the courthouse. I've been sheriff a long time. Made my share of mistakes, but I draw the line at selling women. He turned back. You did right, even if you did it the hard way. Hank handed the deed back. This is yours to do with as you see fit. Cobb shook his head. I'll file it as evidence. Let the marshal sort it out. He adjusted his hat. Take care of her, Hank. Girl like that, she's been through enough. I will. Cobb walked away. Hank watched him go, a man choosing conscience over comfort. It wasn't a small thing. Lydia touched his arm. Can we go home now? Home. She'd called the cabin home. Yeah, Hank said. Let's go home. 6 weeks later, April. The snow was gone. Grass grew green and thick along the creek. Meadowlarks sang from fence posts. The air smelled of warm earth and pine sap. Hank stood on the porch, paintbrush in hand. Lydia held the other end of the sign. Fresh-cut pine, sanded smooth. She'd carved the letters herself, slow and careful. Winter Station, safe passage for women in need. They'd talked about it for weeks. What to do with the cabin now? Hank was getting older. His hands shook more than they used to. The mail route was harder every year, but this felt right. Little to the left, Hank said. Lydia adjusted. He painted the final letter, stepped back. There. She smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her. Full, unguarded, reaching her eyes. It's perfect. They hung the sign above the door. The wood creaked as they secured it with nails. When it was done, they stood side by side, looking at it. You think anyone will come? Lydia asked. I reckon so. Word travels. And it did. By summer, 3 more women had found their way to Winter Station. One from Kansas, fleeing a violent husband, another from Denver, escaping a brothel, a third from Chicago, another mail-order bride, contract forged, same broker. Lydia welcomed them all, gave them coffee, taught them to read by lamplight, helped them find work in town, sewing, cooking, cleaning. Some stayed, some moved on, but all of them left stronger than they arrived. Hank kept writing mail for another year. Then his arthritis got too bad. He retired the route, sold his horse, settled into the cabin full-time, helping Lydia manage the station. One evening in late spring, 3 years after the trial, a wagon pulled up to the cabin. A young man climbed down, nervous. Behind him, Lydia stepped out. She was wearing a blue dress Hank had never seen before. She walked to the porch. The young man followed, hat in his hands. Hank, Lydia said, this is Thomas. He's a schoolteacher. From Cheyenne. Thomas extended his hand. Hank shook it. The man had a firm grip, honest eyes. Mr. Lowell, it's an honor. Is it now? Lydia's cheeks colored. Thomas asked me to marry him. I said yes, but I wanted... She looked at Hank. I wanted your blessing first. Hank studied the young man, saw the way he looked at Lydia, not like property, like a partner. You treat her right? Yes, sir, always. You understand what she's been through? I do, and I'll spend my life making sure she never goes through it again. Hank nodded slowly. Then you've got my blessing. Lydia's eyes filled. She hugged him, quick and fierce. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. You did the hard part, Hank said. I just held the door open. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm not leaving Winter Station. Thomas is moving here. We'll run it together. Good. Place needs you. Thomas cleared his throat. Mr. Lowell, if you do us the honor, we'd like you to stand with us at the ceremony. Hank's throat went tight. I'd be proud to. The wedding was small. Held at the church, Reverend Mills officiating. Mrs. Talbot and Doc Henley attended. Judge Pritchard, now 90 and frail, came down from his ranch to witness it. When the vows were spoken, Hank stood beside Lydia. She wore Mary's ring on her right hand, the one Hank had given her years ago. On her left, Thomas slid a new band into place. Afterward, there was cake, coffee, laughter. As the sun set, Hank walked up the hill to the cemetery. Mary's grave was shaded now by cottonwoods Lydia had planted, big trees, strong and rooted. He knelt, brushed with dirt from the marker. She's married now, he said quietly. Good man, patient, she'll be happy. The wind stirred the leaves overhead, a soft sound, like breathing. I kept my promise, didn't let her go through it alone. He paused. Hope you're proud, Mary. I tried my best. He stood, turned to go, then stopped. On Mary's grave, someone had left wildflowers, fresh picked, still damp with morning dew. Lydia. Hank smiled. He walked back down the hill as the stars came out. The cabin lights glowed warm in the distance. Voices carried on the breeze. Lydia laughing, Thomas saying something that made her laugh again. The creek ran loud and clear, swollen with spring runoff. Water remembers kindness. So do people. Judge Pritchard died the following winter, 91 years old in his sleep. They buried him with full honors. Cavalry flag draped over the coffin, 3 volleys fired at graveside. Half the territory showed up. At the service, Hank stood in the back. The preacher spoke about justice and duty, about a man who'd served his country, then served the law, and never bent either for convenience. When it was over, Mrs. Talbot approached Hank on the church steps. "He left something for you?" she said. She handed him a sealed envelope. Hank opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in the judge's shaky hand. Lowell. Some lies are more honest than the truth men hide behind. You lied to buy time for justice. Durfee told the truth to cover evil. I know which man I'd ride with. Keep that station running. You're doing more good than 10 courtrooms. A. Pritchard. Hank folded the letter carefully, tucked it in his coat. He was a good man, Mrs. Talbot said. Best kind, Hank agreed. Spring came again, then summer, then another winter. By the 5th year, Winter Station had helped 43 women. Some stayed in Copper Bend, others moved on, California, Oregon, back east to family they'd lost touch with. But they all wrote letters, sent news, a few sent money when they could, though Hank never asked. Lydia and Thomas had 2 children by then, a boy and a girl. The boy, they named Amos, after the judge. The girl, Mary. Hank held her when she was born, tiny thing, barely 6 pounds. She had her mother's eyes and a grip that wouldn't quit. She's strong, he said. Like her grandmother, Lydia replied. Hank looked at her. You never met Mary. No, but I know her. Lydia touched the ring on her right hand, the one she still wore even after marriage. She taught you mercy, and you taught me. That's legacy enough. The territorial government took notice, eventually. A man from Cheyenne arrived in a suit and polished shoes, carrying a briefcase full of forms. Mr. Lowell, I'm from the Office of Territorial Development. We've been reviewing your operation. Hank sat on the porch, cup of coffee in hand. That's so. Winter Station, you've been running it, 5 years now? About that. Without any official charter, no funding, no oversight. The man opened his briefcase. Technically, it's illegal. Hank sipped his coffee. You planning to shut us down? That depends. The man pulled out a document. The governor's proposed a pilot program, intercultural settlement initiative, safe houses for displaced women, indigenous, immigrant, domestic refugees, federal funding, official recognition. He set the paper on the porch rail. He wants Winter Station to be the first site. Hank stared at the document. What's the catch? You'd have to follow regulations, submit reports, allow inspections. The man smiled thinly. The government doesn't like things it can't control. And if I say no? Then you keep operating in the gray. No funding, no protection, and eventually someone will shut you down anyway. Hank looked past him, toward the cabin. Lydia was teaching 3 women to read at the kitchen table. Their voices drifted through the open door, halting, determined. I'll need to think on it. You have 2 weeks. The man left. Hank sat alone on the porch, watching the sunset. That night, he talked it over with Lydia and Thomas. If we take the funding, Thomas said, we could expand, help more women, build a real school. If we take the funding, Lydia countered, we answer to bureaucrats. They'll want to dictate who we help, how we help them. Hank was quiet for a long time. What would the judge do? Lydia asked. Hank smiled. He'd tell them to go to hell, then he'd figure out how to work the system anyway. In the end, they accepted, with conditions. Winter Station would keep its independence. No one turned away, no quotas, no restrictions based on race, religion, or origin. The government agreed, mostly because they needed the program to work, and Winter Station was already working. By the 10th year, there were 6 stations across the territory, by the 20th, 40. All of them traced back to a cabin in Wyoming where an old post rider once gave water to a dying woman in the snow. Hank Lowell died at 79. Heart gave out on a warm June morning. He was sitting on the porch, watching his great-grandchildren play by the creek. They buried him on the hill beside Mary. Lydia planted more cottonwoods. The whole town came. 300 people, maybe more. Some had known him, others only knew the stories. At the graveside, Lydia stood with Thomas and their children. She held Mary's hand. The girl was 15 now, already helping run the station. Reverend Mills said a prayer. Then Lydia spoke. Hank Lowell stopped when others rode on. He gave water when others gave judgment. He stood when others sat. Her voice was steady, strong. He taught me that mercy isn't weakness, it's the hardest kind of strength. She knelt, placed a single object on the grave, a battered tin cup, the same one Hank had used to give her coffee that first night. Water remembers kindness, she said quietly. So do we. Years later, historians would write about Winter Station. Academic papers, government reports, they'd argue about its impact, its methodology, its place in territorial history. But in Copper Bend, people remembered simpler things. An old man who stopped in a snowstorm, a woman who learned to read by lamplight, a courtroom where truth cracked a seal and set someone free, and a creek that ran clear and cold, year after year, carrying mercy downstream. By summer, the registry book sat framed in the Copper Bend courthouse. Seals still broken, glass protecting the pages. Tourists came sometimes, asked about it. Locals would tell them the story, how one broken seal freed a woman and changed a territory. Durfee's ranch was sold off piece by piece. The land went to homesteaders, good families, the kind who worked hard and didn't ask questions about your past. His name faded from memory the way all small tyrants' names do. Winter Station kept running, through droughts and hard winters, through territorial changes and statehood, through wars and depressions. The building expanded, added rooms, a schoolhouse, a clinic, but the original cabin stayed at the center, preserved like a heart. Above the door, the sign Hank and Lydia painted still hung, wood-weathered now, letters faded but readable. Winter Station safe passage for women in need. Some folks spend their lives chasing justice in legislatures and courtrooms, writing laws, arguing precedent, important work, necessary work. But Hank Lowell found justice in simpler things, a cup of coffee, a torn envelope, the notion that a person isn't cargo, no matter what paper says. On quiet spring mornings, if you stand by the creek, you can still hear it running over stones, clear and cold, constant as mercy. The cottonwoods Mary planted shade the whole cemetery now. Their roots run deep, drawing water from that same creek. In summer, their leaves sound like rain. Hank's buried there between two women he loved. His daughter on one side, Lydia's grave, decades later, on the other. 3 generations of family, blood and chosen both. The tin cup sits in a museum now. Behind glass, school children press their faces close, reading the placard. But the creek keeps running. Water remembers kindness, so do people. And some mercies outlive the men who gave them.